Have you ever dreamed of making your own podcast? You probably haven't, but today I'm going to annoy the crap out of you anyway and tell you my story of making my own podcast in hopes of helping you, yes, you, the viewer, who has never made your own podcast, with a bit of advice on what to do and how to make it engaging for the audience and to get people interested in what you're talking about. I have made almost 50 podcasts. It's actually not that many. It's actually a really poor amount of podcasts. Most people make hundreds of podcasts, but I have made 50 very okay podcasts as opposed to hundreds of very average podcasts. It's kind of the same thing essentially. So I'm going to go through the podcasts I have made, and there's one that I've appeared on, but I wasn't involved in the editing of that podcast or any production of it. And I'm going to talk to you about my experience of working with other people and also doing podcasts by yourself, and the vast difference of working with people that you're kind of friends with, that you've known for a little while, and working with people that you've known for many years and you have a really good cohesion with. And even if there is one person talking for like 30 minutes about something and then the other person talks, it still works because you knew that person for a very long time. You know what I'm talking about when you're trying to make a podcast with your friends and you're an average Joe and you're doing a podcast with someone you've known for a long time or you've known for a short time. There's always going to be that one dude that just wants to yabble on for a very long amount of time. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. This is something that's part of podcasting, trying to continue and do stuff like that. It's not a bad thing. I always thought this was a bad thing. It's good for the viewers when they're interested in what the person is talking about. It is a good thing. The unique part of podcasts is you can actually just skip ahead. You know, you can skip past certain bits where someone rambles on for a while. There's all sorts of stuff you can do with it. As long as you've got two hosts who are decent people, that's all you need. That is not something that I've personally always had with podcasting. This now can't be uploaded as a public video now, can it? People are going to see this who I've worked with on podcasts and be like, bruh, look, I've had a fair share of chinks in the road doing podcasts. In fact, most of my podcast ventures have ended in disaster. The first one that I ever did, though, is still going. It's the only one that's still going, and it's called The Roast Podcast, and is the first one that I'm going to talk about today. So The Roast Podcast is a podcast I've done with my lifelong family friend, Adam, and we have been filming this in all forms, audio, video, over the internet, all kinds of ways to do a podcast you could think of in a very poor production value since 2018. Since November 2018, we have been doing this podcast. And the frequency of episodes uploaded is poor. We rarely catch up to record them. There was like one this year and there was two last year, and they're at the very start of the year. So we don't make them very often. But when we do, they're actually quite engaging. And I feel like we have a very good cohesion and a very good way of telling stories and a very good way of engaging the audience. Now, as I mentioned, it's called The Roast Podcast. Basically, the idea behind it was talking about things that really grinded our gears in our lives. We are both, we're interesting people. I don't want to put anyone else under the bus, i.e. Adam, but I myself, very ADHD, a little bit on the autism spectrum. So things annoy me very easily. And there's always going to be something to have a, roast about and to argue about. And Adam's a bit the same. So we decided in 2018, we talked about it while we were living together throughout that year, we should probably make a podcast because there's too many things that we want to get angry about. And I feel like doing it in front of a mic and on a platform would be a great idea. So we started the Roast Podcast, of course, and it's been going pretty well, if I'm honest. We've never had the best production value. That's the only issue with the podcast. The content's amazing. What we talk about is incredible. Our cohesion between one another and what we talk about is fantastic. The only problem is the production value, as I mentioned, and we live really far away. We don't live anywhere near one another, and we don't keep in contact as regularly, I think, as two podcast co-hosts should. So we know we're probably going to be lifelong friends, though. So recording episodes frequently is not something we worry about because we know we're going to, keep recording them on and on and on as the years go by. I can't even speak right now. Sorry, guys. But yeah, that is a podcast that I think has been very engaging since we started. And since we recorded that pilot episode back in 2018, in November 2018, the good news is we now have production value. We now have this set up. So the next episode we record will be the first with this proper setup. And that's what I'm going to get to next, is how this setup was created, was the On We Talk podcast. This is a podcast I appeared on as a co-host after getting to know the host of it over a long period of time. I first appeared as a guest and someone who had their own YouTube channel, but a very small YouTube channel. This person is a great dude. He's awesome. Except when he's not. And that's tough. Very self-indulgent co-host or host of a podcast. And, very his way is first sort of dude. And I didn't really know this to its full scale until I visited him at his home in New South Wales. And I found his family to be amazing. His mum was awesome. And I found it to be a pretty interesting experience. And he was sick the entire time. So obviously he wasn't going to be at his best. Obviously he wasn't going to be at his happiest. And it was a tough one. It really was a bit of a disaster. We were meant to film so many different projects. We were meant to just raise the roof. And it never really went down that way. And you look back on it and you think of it as an interesting sort of experience, an unfortunate experience, but you realize what certain people are like to work with and how things work out for the worst and for the best. And it may be tough me explaining this because it doesn't sound right, because it's from my own experience and no one probably knows the hell I'm talking about trying to explain this. But that was a very fascinating experience for me and something I look back on with pride. It's just not something I could continue doing. I burnt out from working with this person badly, mainly because I didn't really know this person, and he was wasn't trying to insult me, but I don't know, was trying to dig into wounds that he knew probably existed with me, personally, and stuff that I never really wanted to talk about with him or raise on a podcast platform or on a video call. It wasn't in the middle of podcasts often, but it was a few times. And the kind of person who will try and dig into a topic where he knows I don't really want to talk about it for the sake of the podcast being entertaining in his eyes. So I was like, yeah, that's not really going to work for me. And the worst was after the last recording we ever did together. He kind of just really dug in there and tried to really reach a sensitive spot with me. And I was like, yeah, this ain't going to work. I don't know you well enough to do this. And I think he didn't do it intentionally, though. I think he just didn't really, still probably learning how to, I guess, treat people with respect. I say it like that because I think if you want a certain level of professionalism with doing a podcast, and this is the best advice I can give, it doesn't matter how well you think you might know someone, or if you're good enough mates with them or whatever, you never bring up anything that could hit a soft spot with someone. Anything that is likely to hit a soft spot, you just don't do that. You try and keep the peace, you try and keep it, good vibes, and you try and keep things as, fun as possible. And if you ever work with someone who doesn't do that, even if they screw up just a few times, that's probably enough to be like, I don't know about this. It might not work. So that was what happened with that podcast. We recorded a lot of good ones, and we did it every single week in this room. There's even still freaking Uber Eats boxes in this room because it's fucked from when I used to record with him, and I used to order Uber Eats right before we recorded, and then we recorded an episode. And they're good memories. It's just not something I had the mental capacity to keep going with. I couldn't continue with it at all. Mentally, it was a strain. It was a huge strain. Just catching up with someone every week on a video call was enough for me to be like, this is not easy. But once someone says things that they didn't even know anything about me, but once people start having stabs in the dark about the kind of person you could be and what your life could be like and what happens in your life and just shit like that, you kind of just go, okay, this isn't a professional setting whatsoever. This isn't for me. This person needs to work with someone who likes this sort of thing, who isn't me, is the most simple way I can put it. That's the best advice I can give. If you're someone who's thin-skinned like myself, no, I'm very thick-skinned. I'm thin-skinned when there's ridiculousness happening. when something's not kosher. Let's just say that. But maybe if you are someone who's thin-skinned, don't work with someone on a podcast with a co-hosting thing who isn't serious. Who's not professional, who's not doing it properly. Work with someone who you've known for a long time and who you probably trust a bit better, not to say things out of turn and talk just ridiculous nonsense to you. That's not what you want. So On We Talk was the other podcast I did. The third one I did was called the Inebriated Individuals podcast, and it was recorded in this exact spot. On We Talk was also recorded in this exact spot, and there were episodes of the Roast podcast recorded right here. But the Inebriated Individuals podcast is the one that I remember most fondly recorded in this spot. We recorded 3 recordings. We recorded 6 episodes and 3 big recordings. I think it was 5 episodes. Or 5 1/4 episodes. I don't know how that works, but it does. It was an interesting journey. The first recording we did was all right. It went okay. We didn't record another one for several months, but that went all right. The second one we did was brilliant. It was amazing. We had great chats. We talked about hilarious things. We had laughs. It was brilliant. We had this button where if you pressed it, everyone has to do a shot. And you purposely press it at the worst moments, and it was great. It was good fun. There was great vibes. It just worked. It just worked perfectly. This second recording, and I thought after this second recording, we might be good. We might be good. Another thing that happened in the second recording was we all reacted to the latest video that we made that I edited just right before we did that, and that was cool. That was awesome, and that's still on video. And I'm like frantically trying to get a second phone to record their reactions to it, which I look back and I'm like, oh, that's fucking cringe. What I liked about this podcast was it was fucking tight quarters. So look at this. This isn't much room. I used to put the table in front of these 2 things here. You can't see the second one. This one you can't see. But I used to put the table in front of this, and I used to go, all right, guys, we're all going to huddle in. And not all of us are the smallest, so we'd literally be squashed together. Not literally squashed. We had some space, but we were all sitting on one of these chairs, and they were all right up against one another, these chairs, and that was our setup. And the other boys hated it, and I was like, this is the best set. This is so cool. We're all like huddled together, middle of winter, it's fucking freezing. We're in the warmest part of the room. This is sick. This is what we want. We're all just drinking away, having a great time, sitting down in front of a camera, recording a podcast. It's something that I miss. I would love to do it again. The problem was the last podcast. One of the co-hosts of the podcast name was Matt. And Matt, social cues, not his strong suit at all times. He was a bit, let's just say, angry for no reason a lot of the time. And confrontational and rude. But he's a good dude. He's a great dude. He just didn't really understand the flow of a podcast and how you're not supposed to say certain things, look away when someone's talking, react. Like, you can't be honest on a podcast. No, joking. Of course you can be fucking honest. This dude wasn't exactly keeping the flow going in like a nice way. He made it awkward a few times by his lack of interest and lack of amusement at certain moments. And I think that kind of fractured it and wrecked it. And he made it very clear that he didn't like it. So we were just like, well, what can we do? That was the last ever podcast recording, and it makes me sad because there was so much fun to record. You just get a table in front of this, you're all huddled up, and you just put a bunch of drinks on it and you record, and it was amazing. I used to love them. I fucking loved doing them. I just feel like for that format, I had the wrong group of people for it because it was just not working cohesively. The last ever recording we did was the Hot Sauce Inebriated Individuals, which I've mentioned in other things, and it exists, of course, on a playlist. And we recorded a podcast style. We recorded a similar thing, and it didn't go too well. Everyone was kind of off the rails by that point, and they were talking garbage in all sorts of areas, and I was like, yeah, this isn't going to work. It's too loose now. It's lost its charm that it once had. And that was it. That was the Inebriated Individuals podcast. Let me just keep banging this table. It was a shame when it ended. I was really disappointed. I wanted it to keep going. I thought it would have been very, very funny to do. Very, very, they're just more fun to record. And that was back in the days where I didn't have the mic immediately being synced as it was recording. I would actually sync it later on. Nightmare to edit. Absolute nightmare to edit. It was the worst because you needed multiple people's microphones sunk perfectly. Sounded horrendous in post. When you go back and listen to them, they sound awful. And it just didn't flow. Now I have the one microphone between two people, Adam and myself, and we record another roast podcast soon in this room. And it just works, and it's all done in one go. So you just press the button on OBS. You don't even have to edit it, because the way I do podcasts usually is lack of editing. However, the last episodes of Inebriated Individuals podcast, the last two had lots of editing. I had a lot of cutaways. I had a new style that I wanted to go with, where it had Jake's graphics that he edited in Maya over several hours, with video in the graphics to make it look awesome and to make it entertaining, and to engage the viewers a bit more. And that looked amazing. So that would have been incredible with this setup that I have right now. This amazing setup that would have looked insane. The only problem was we had a 2-bit operation back then. We had shitty mics between the three of us all at once. We had Jake's camera, which was shocking. We didn't use this one because we didn't have what we have now, which is just a battery that plugs straight into it. Job done, sorted. We had nothing. So yeah, you look back and you go, damn, I wish I had the tech I have now, but that's just what it is. The person I did the On We Talk podcast with, Matt, he was unreal with getting me sorted with all this tech. I had the money back then, so I could actually buy it. I was able to buy the Elgato 4K cam link. I was able to buy the HDMI cord that goes to that. All sorts of shit to get this thing working. OBS, I got that sorted with the perfect settings that I now have. As you can see, it just worked. It was amazing. And then as it went along, as I mentioned, it just didn't work. There was no cohesion between hosts. It just it died. What he wanted out of me was not what I wanted from the dynamic. The dynamic was shocking, if I'm honest. It was not good. And that's where I bring to my final point in this long ramble. That is where I reach my final point. You need a good dynamic. You need to do a podcast with someone you've known for a very, very long time. Someone you know is a genuinely nice person who just does not speak out of turn. If you're doing a podcast with people that you're worried are just going to say something that is really going to piss you off and ruin the recording for you, and they're just going to talk shit. First of all, they're probably not people you should be friends with. You should get rid of them as friends. But second of all, they're just never going to be entertaining recordings, and they're never going to be stuff to look back at fondly. The Roast podcast is the only podcast I look back at and don't quiver a single bit. That's the only one I look back at and go, you little fucking ripper. Because Adam is a legend. He is a living legend. The guy is probably one of the nicest people I've known in my life. It's a bit of a, bit biased because I've known him since I was like zero. Our parents met in like primary school when they were in primary school. So there you go. I've known him our entire lives. And the banner of our podcast YouTube channel is us when we were like 4 years old at a playground that's just up the road from my house here. So that's the Roast podcast for you. It is like, it's a proper unity of two people who just like get along like a house on fire, always have proper conversation cohesion, are just good people and don't talk shit. And the other two podcasts I had, there was different range of people. The Inebriated Individuals one, I think they're on the lower, sorry guys, I think they're on the lower range of good people. I think that, they're not bad people, but they just, you can tell I'm fucking nervous talking about people badly and shit talking my old friends. It's not the best thing to do. But I have to do this if anyone watches this and they want to make their own podcast and they're wondering how they make it work. This is the best advice I can give, is work with people that you know aren't going to fuck around and aren't going to ruin the process. Because to make a podcast, if you're a freaking sensitive little boy like me, No, if you're someone who wants to make a good podcast that you look back on and go, fuck yeah, you need to work with people who aren't going to be jerks. You need to work with good people. Inebriated individuals could be jerks at times. Jake and Matt could be jerks. Definitely. They were capable of it. I'd sit there and I'd think, maybe there's a comment or two coming my way that's really going to piss me off. Never actually happened on that podcast. It did off camera quite a bit. Never on camera. On recording nights, not quite a bit when I'm catching up with them. But on recording nights, it was usually all good off camera. But on camera, didn't happen much. The On We Talk podcast, holy shit. The last recording I did, he unloaded for no reason. Started being a jerk for a good period of time. And he knows this and he's embarrassed by it. But hey, that's what ends partnerships. You be a jerk to someone for no reason, try and get a little scoop or try and be funny, what you think is funny. It was weird because it was just the two of us and it wasn't like there were people in the background like going, haha, that's hilarious, to try and validate what he was saying and go, yeah, that's funny as, bro. There was no one there. He was just trying to make himself laugh. And that's why you don't work with like self-indulgent, self-obsessed, narcissistic sort of people. Because they want their own agenda and they want to do things their way. And you realize that it's their way or the highway, and you're never going to get a proper unity. And you're never going to get a proper conversation with serious topics and good shit. And that was the one thing I desired the most out of a podcast. I wanted good conversation. I wanted actual, like, to talk about anything. To talk about very, very serious, hard-hitting shit, like mental health stuff, all kinds of shit like that, like really, really deep shit I wanted to talk about in a podcast. Stuff that I'd never pictured talking about very rarely. And with On We Talk, Matthew Winter, every time I thought, oh, this could happen, I could do a recording where I talk about some really serious stuff, I realized that he's just not the type of person that would be interested in talking about anything serious, would not be interested in talking about anything deep or hard-hitting, because he just wasn't the type of host for that. He's not the type of person that cares about that. He just wants stupid, sort of, not stupid, that's a bit harsh. He just wants sort of, comedic stuff, or wants to just constantly crack jokes or banter. Banter's the best way of putting it. He just wants constant banter. That was what he was after. And just like weird comedy in weird places. He didn't want an actual serious sort of flow. That's what I was after. If you watch some of those episodes, there are some little rants I go on where I talk about serious stuff. There's one that was never released, which was the last recording. Of course, I go back to that, the last recording. That was never released. That was when I talked about some really serious shit. And it just didn't work. He didn't want to be there when I was talking about serious shit. You don't work with people like that, guys. Work with someone who is happy to talk about anything, who is a podcaster. A podcaster. There we go. And that is literally Adam. And look, Roast Podcast, it took 2 years for me to record another podcast. Now, I should talk about the actual podcast that was going to be. This is the fourth one. This doesn't count as the Inebriated Individuals podcast with the three fellas. This is the last thing I'm going to talk about in this very long podcast rant thing that I just felt like doing off the cuff. That's why it's so weird. I had an idea in early 2020 to make a drinking podcast with multiple different friends, and every episode is a different friend. And we're sitting on a table, multicam setup, which is really fucking hard to edit if you don't have a switcher, automatic switcher. And we're just drinking beers and talking nonsense and just having a great time. And the first episode I ever recorded was with my friends Jake, Matt, and Max from TAFE. And they were borderline cunts. The entire night they were jerks. They had no clue what they were saying. They were just being assholes. And you're probably thinking, Sam, why did you ever work with these people again? Well, to that I say, not... I wanted to do drinking stuff and I wanted to do all sorts of different things. And I didn't really understand at that age that you don't work with people who are capable of being jerks. But that recording, the very first one for this alcohol-related podcast, was a shocker. And it was based on Cold Ones, obviously. I was heavily inspired by Cold Ones. I wanted it to be exactly like that. I wanted it to be hilarious. I wanted it to be just this really entertaining sort of show. And it just wasn't happening. And it was a huge, huge disappointment. It was a huge shame recording the whole thing. I've gone back to it hundreds of times probably trying to find moments I liked. There is nothing in it that I will look back on, I listen to, and I'm like, that was amazing. The only thing that makes it great is the technical achievement I was able to pull off back then, because I was only like 20 years old, had no clue what I was doing, didn't understand that you just buy a switcher and it does it automatically with cameras if you hook them all up with cam links. Had no clue what I was doing. Could have just done that. I decided to manually edit 3 different cameras in editing software after they've all recorded on the SD cards. That was how I did it. So the technical achievement of making it look like it was just done with a program, but it was all done manually over painstaking hours and like during a week editing it, was pretty impressive. And I look back and I think that's something I'm very proud of. But the actual conversation and the guests I got on the show, terrible, terrible, terrible. Again, make podcasts with people who are good people and who are going to talk good stuff and who aren't going to talk shit. There is one podcast, I did with Adam, just one. And it was back in 2018 and he was talking shit, but it wasn't the kind of shit where you start talking garbage and you know it's really going to hit a soft spot with someone and really piss them off, because it didn't. It was genuine banter, but it was kind of irritating, but it was a good meme. And that was the only time. And it was just probably, I don't know, it was just random. But I bring it up because I say it was one time, because it just doesn't mean anything to me. It was just a meme. Like, it just, who cares? And we have good banter on the Roast podcast, but it never crosses the line. You don't want to record with someone who is going to cross the line intentionally and intentionally see you as an easy target and intentionally trying to fucking piss you off. That is fucking straight up, and I hate using this word, I'm going to do it, bullying. They're not your friends. They're fucking jerks. Do not record with assholes. I'm going to tell you right now. People who intend to bully and piss you off for the sake of content and for the sake of acting, for thinking they're cool, fucking suck. They actually suck, and they're probably really insecure about certain aspects of their own life that they're really struggling with. That's another thing. Don't work with people who are struggling in their own lives. Only if they're really decent people. And even if they don't want to talk about it, that's fine. But if they're decent people who don't ever make that a part of your friendship with them, who don't like get jealous and say stupid shit because they're struggling and they're pissed off, but they just want to make you suffer because they're suffering, don't work with people like that, please. If you think that they're some sort of charity case and you really want what's best for them and you really want to see them flourish and you want to be friends with them and you want to help them, that's all well and good. But if they're dragging you down, do not fucking even be friends with them. Forget working with them on podcasts. I mean, this is what it's all about. This is sort of a psychological drive. This is me telling people my mistakes of doing podcasts. This is the whole point of this podcast. It's me telling people my mistakes of what I did wrong when I recorded podcasts, so you guys don't do the same thing. You guys don't make the same mistakes I made. If you're someone that's interested in friend interaction and who values your self-respect and who really wants, just have a good time all the time, then follow my advice when recording podcasts, because a podcast is digitally imprinted, meaning that once it's done, it's there. And if you can delete it, you can privatize it, you can unlist it, you can do whatever you want with it, but it has been recorded and it has been up for at least some period of time. So if you're working with someone that you are not happy working with, and you think that even if you have the slightest shred of doubt, that's enough, that's more than enough, you don't work with those people. You just don't do it, because they are just self-destructive people who are just going to try and bring you down. And especially when a camera is involved, they're going to make it 10 times worse. That's the best advice I could possibly give anyone. Again, take it as you want to, but yeah, it's a really tough thing to do. Trying to figure out who's the best person to work with, you can't ever do that. I thought I was the best judge of character ever, and I worked with assholes for many years. I worked with terrible people who really who just wanted themselves as the freaking star. They didn't want to include other people. They didn't want to, be really great for the process or be really good blokes. They just wanted to fuck around and put themselves in there. Do not work with these types of people on anything, ever. Anything ever. Do not, I'm trying to do the Michael Scott Office quote. Do not do anything ever. Never do anything against anyone ever. So stupid. Um, that's him and David Wallace's office in like early season 5. Anyway, that was a fucking dumb tangent. I still do the roast podcast. We recorded one like 5 months ago. It's the first podcast I ever did, and it's very soon, not at the moment, but very soon it's going to be the most recent podcast I did. And that's pretty amazing. Pretty incredible. You'd much rather, if you're doing your first podcast, good. Start with someone who's decent. If you want to do podcasts with a bit of loose cannons, crazy people, and you think it'd be good for entertainment, give it a whirl. Give it a try. I think it was because Adam, this whole thing started of me trying other things and other podcasts because Adam didn't drink. That was why. And I wanted drinking buddies for a podcast. Don't go after that. Go after good chats. That's what a podcast is designed for. That's why people listen to podcasts. They want to better themselves. They want to listen to something that can help them live their lives and make them happier. That's like, I'm pretty sure that's the number one thing people go for in a podcast. And you need a host who is okay with you talking about whatever the fuck you want to talk about. If there's someone who doesn't want to talk about something that you really want to talk about, forget about them. Especially if it's something serious. If it's just some garbage that, you know, you're interested in and no one else is interested in, they're not interested in, maybe hold that topic back. Maybe do that in your own little podcast like this one. But if it's something really important that you feel passionately about and you really want to talk about it, and you think your co-host of your podcast doesn't want to hear that shit and doesn't want to do a recording with you where you're talking about something genuine and something important, fuck them. Don't record with a person like that. Do not record with people like that. Again, I got to get back to what my main point is. The first podcast I ever did is still the best podcast I ever did. And it is amazing. And I'm going to be real with you guys. There was a point where the roast podcast, I didn't think it was going to keep going. I didn't think it was just going to work. I thought, nah, I'm doing all these other podcasts now. And I actually unlisted all the episodes on that channel and removed, I think, the thumbnail for the channel and the banner and was like, nah, done with this. Has 18 subscribers anyway. Who cares? A podcast, can I just say, first and foremost, is not about how many people you get listening. It's about how many good conversations you can come up with. Because at the end of the day, anything you make lives and dies with you. So you're never going to get something that's, you know, going to be viewed by millions of people. You probably don't want 18 subscribers and like one viewer every podcast. We're trying to improve that. But you want something that's engaging to listen to. You listen to it back and you're like, fuck, this is good. This is entertaining. This is really, really good. And you want decent people. First and foremost is 2 decent people on your podcast. And I feel very fortunate and lucky to have had that with the Roast podcast since late 2018. That's how you want to do it. That is the exact way to go. And as I wrap up this lone self-deprecating, no, it's definitely not. I've shat on so many fucking people in this podcast, way more than myself. As I wrap this thing up, all I can say is, guys, work with people that you want to work with and that you think you should work with, and make that your first podcast. If it's going to be your first podcast, make it the best person you can do a podcast with, and then go and make other podcasts with people that are shitty, and then go back to the original. But keep working on the original. Keep going. Because the best decision I made with podcasting was going, you know what? This is stupid. I'm going to fix this channel. Making all the podcasts public again on the Roast Podcast channel, reinstating the banner, reinstating the profile picture, and starting from the top and going, you little beauty, let's go. Let's do this. Let's make podcast great again. Make it a good podcast and just, you know, make it really entertaining and really anything ever. Never. I'm obviously at the end. I've clearly reached the end. Look, that's it. With all the advice I can give you guys, that's it. It's very, very simple advice, I know. And I'm someone who really, really thinks passionately about how people should treat one another, especially on camera and especially with professionalism. And that was probably the last thing I was going to say is strive for professionalism. strive for working with a professional individual who knows professionalism and knows how to act accordingly. That's what you should strive for. There you go. There you go. That's the best advice I can give. That's all I can do. All I can do is tell you guys how it is, and that's how it is. Look forward to the next episode of the Roast Podcast being recorded in this studio. I cannot fucking wait. I'm going to try and get my webcam, which is here, set up as a multiple camera, as an alternate shot, and do a shot change between shots. That would be really cool. That would be awesome. Look forward to it, guys, and have fun making your own podcast. Make something that you know that you'll want to watch back and you'll be happy with, because that's what it's all about. Yeah.